There are fears for the safety of the royal family before the King's coronation after a man was arrested last night for throwing gun cartridges into the grounds of Buckingham Palace. Roads are already closed for the enormous security operation, which is called Golden Orb. And here are the details. 29,000 officers are being deployed in London. Snipers will be lining rooftops along the procession route and around the Abbey, and plainclothes police will be mingling among the crowds. A no-fly zone will be in place over central London. Flying drones will be banned. 200 royal fanatics believed to pose a risk to the family are being very closely monitored. And new laws have been rushed through to give police the power to deal with anti-royalist protesters. But the Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner reassured the public earlier today, saying they are working extremely hard to keep the city safe.
I would say this to people, we've debriefed our plans after that incident, just to make sure that there are no gaps, and we're absolutely confident that we've got a plan that will deliver the coronation in such a manner that everyone will come to London and celebrate, and there will be no issues whatsoever. So our main priority really is to make sure that we deliver the coronation in such a manner that is safe and secure for everyone. We have an extremely low threshold for anything or anyone that is going to disrupt this celebratory event.
Joining me in the studio, former Chief Superintendent at the Met Police, Parm Sandhu, and TalkTV's Royal Editor, Sarah Hewson. Good to have you both in the studio today. Shall we start with you, Sarah? You can just tell us what happened last night and how seriously it was taken.
Yes, around about 7 o'clock last night, a man approached the gates of Buckingham Palace, spoke to police there and asked for a soldier, we understand. And when he was told that there wasn't a soldier available, he allegedly threw shotgun cartridges through the gates of Buckingham Palace, so into palace grounds. He was quickly detained by police. He was searched. He was found to have a knife on his possession. Then he was arrested. After he'd been arrested, he then said about his rucksack that needs to be handled carefully, and that is why he then had a controlled explosion outside at Buckingham Palace. The cordon was put up and a much bigger security operation went into force then. He was taken into custody and is being questioned. But I think police were very happy with the response to it. Parm will probably be able to give us more on that it is the kind of thing that they would have been expecting, prepared for. It was handled very swiftly.
Parm, how serious is that combination? So as a man with grenades, a knife and some kind of explosive device in a rucksack that needs to be detonated under supervision, a controlled explosion. I mean, that sounds incredibly ominous in all different sorts of ways all at once, doesn't it?
It does sound pretty awful, but it was shotgun cartridges that he threw into the palace grounds. And all of these types of risks and these contingencies would have been built into the plan. And as we heard from the Deputy Assistant Commissioner there, even after last night's incident, the plans would have been reviewed. So the plans for the actual coronation would have been done decades ago. And every time there's a ceremonial or there's a large-scale operation, they are reviewed and they're updated, because in the past you wouldn't have had CCTV, you wouldn't have had automatic number plate recognition. You know, you can do so much more now than you could when those plans were probably originally written. So although it sounds really bad, that would have been planned for. And even now, going forward, you know, there could be another individual who does something similar for attention or for whatever reason that they choose to do it.
I mean, you know, heaven forbid somebody in a crowd that is thousands and thousands strong can, I suppose, theoretically smuggle in almost anything if they want to, because after all, you know, people who are lining the route won't be examined, they won't have their bags searched or anything like that, or will they? And is that where the plainclothes police officers circulating among the crowd really come into their own?
If members of the public are going into protected areas, there will be airport type screening, and they can be stopped and searched, but the majority of people will not be searched. And this is why this isn't just for police to do. This is for the public to look around, and if they notice anything untoward or they think that there's something suspicious, they can tell the police officers that are near them. But in addition to those uniformed officers, you have got the plainclothes officers who will have been trained in behavioural analysis. They'll be looking for anybody who's behaving in a manner that they're shifty or they're trying to avoid police or avoid cameras. So all of that will be taken into account, and then that individual could be stopped and searched. But this is going to be a collaboration of the public, the police and security working together.
I mean, this is all quite vivid in all our memories, Sarah, because we've just lived through Her Majesty the Queen's funeral, and we know about the enormous numbers of people. We know about that great queue, the like of which we're never going to see again, winding its way all the way around London. And we know that theoretically every person in the queue could have posed a risk to any other person in the queue, and certainly the filing down to pay respects to the Queen as she lay in state. You know, anything at all could have happened. Thank goodness it didn't. But we know that police officers were deployed from all over the country to come to London and help, weren't they?
Yes, pulling together of all forces in order to put into place Operation London Bridge. This isn't quite as big in scale because you're talking about a more confined area. We've got a shorter procession route than we had for the Queen's coronation, and one of the reasons for that is about security, and it certainly keeps the costs down if you make it 1.3 miles instead of 5 miles. But there's a delicate balance to strike here because the government, the royal family, the police want this to be a celebration. They want this to be a public event. And at the time of the Queen's funeral, I was being interviewed on American television and they kept asking me, but we can't believe how close you get to members of your royal family. That wouldn't happen with the President of the United States. There'd be screens, there'd be barriers. But that is the risk that is taken. The royal family want to be seen, they want to be out there, and particularly on big celebrations like this, they want the public to be there. And so therefore you've got to have this big police presence. Don't forget there are also 10,000 military personnel also taking part.
Talk to me a little bit about coordinating this, because it must be the planning and strategic nightmare of all nightmares. I can't even envisage how you brief all these people, how you keep them all on message alert for hours on end, and what you're exactly alerting them to when you don't really know, and how you coordinate people who've been deployed in from other forces who never worked with the other people before, etc. So give us some idea of what goes on behind the scenes.
With all of this, there will have been rehearsals, there will have been tabletop exercises, as well as the physical rehearsals that we've seen in the last week. But every single police officer will sit through a briefing. And when you mention the 200 individuals who are fixated individuals, I would say they pose the greatest risk.
Just tell us what that means, fixated.
Right, they are the greatest risk because they are people who are obsessed with the royal family, and they are the people that you can't plan for because they could jump over a barrier, they could do something untoward without any plan. They're lone wolves, basically. And in a lot of cases, they may have some mental health issues. So how do you plan for somebody who's got mental health issues? So that's why I say this is a collaboration of public security and police coming together to protect the royal family, but also to protect each other. And that's why the briefings have to be so done so clearly and so properly. And you are quite right in that there are officers from up and down the country who may not have even been to London themselves, who are policing London. And that's where the coordination, that cooperation and sharing of intelligence has to be paramount.
And Sarah, I mean, one of the things that most of us will remember clearly is that on various occasions the royal family have been subject to all kinds of kind of invasive and frightening and threatening behaviour. I mean, obviously we're all remembering Michael Fagan literally breaking into Buckingham Palace and sitting on the Queen's bed.
Most recently there was the man with a crossbow in the grounds of Windsor Castle, for example, saying he wanted to kill the Queen. The royal family are not averse, you know, they're not strangers to this, but very much take the attitude that they do not want to let the minority spoil these kind of occasions for the majority. And that is why you have such detailed planning in order to protect the integrity of the event and the celebration for all.
I mean, one of the things that's brought all this to the forefront, I think, is Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's obvious, I mean, anger and frustration and worry at what they consider to be the absence of security paid for by our government for their safety. And Prince Harry saying, I was born a prince, there's nothing I can do about it, I'm going to need safety round the clock, and so my children, so is my wife forever, and I don't see how you could possibly not finance it. I mean, he's been livid and furious. And then when something like the incident last night at the palace happens, it all suddenly comes into great sort of shocking relief. You can see why he's worried.
Yeah, I mean, look, to put it into perspective, there were no members of the royal family. The Queen and the King, the Queen Consort and the King were not at Buckingham Palace at the time. This was an area of the street where the public are milling around. But the King had been there earlier in the day meeting the Australian president, the Prime Minister. Their actual security in this incident wasn't directly threatened. But you're right about Prince Harry's claims, and he is still going through the legal process against the Home Office, claiming that he needs to know that he has security for his family when they come to the United Kingdom. Now, when he comes to an event like this, like the Platinum Jubilee, like the Queen's funeral, he is a part of the bigger royal security operation, and so it doesn't pose a problem to him in the same way. It is when he and his family are here, when they're staying at Frogmore Cottage, for example, when they might go out on their own.
Parm, what is it like for the police who are in charge of security for the royal family when, for example, as the King does, we've seen him do it and it's hugely endeared him, I think, to many, many of his subjects, he suddenly says, right, I'm doing a bit of a walkabout now. Let me go press a bit of flesh, I'll pat a few babies on the head, I'll go and look at the flowers or whatever it is, and leaps out of the royal conveyance and starts milling around the public. I mean, I'm imagining it engenders panic in the people who are supposed to look after him.
It absolutely is, and you can see the panic on some of those officers' faces. Because they are there trying to create that safety bubble around their principal. They'll call him the principal. And then he's going outside of that safety bubble. But we all know that our royal family does want to do that. And there are times when you see those protection officers literally trying to marshal him back in without causing any sort of offence, and also without causing any disrespect to the members of the public, because that's what the public want to see. They want to shake hands, they want to be close to the royal family.
And there have been changes in the law rushed through, haven't there, just prior to the coronation? So these are changes stopping various kind of obstructive sorts of protests. Now, obviously, it's highly controversial. There have been people saying this is, you know, peaceful protest, and once you take our liberty and rights to do that away, then we very rarely get them back again, and we don't like it. It's draconian, it's authoritarian, it's absolutely not commensurate with living in a democracy. However, it's obviously been deemed essential, particularly in the light of the Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, and all the other disruptive protests, because if people started gluing themselves to the route of coronation procession, it would be a terrible shame for, I think the vast majority of people who are very much looking forward to it.
Yes, and so police now have new powers of arrest for anyone who locks on, effectively chains themselves or glues themselves to buildings, railings, rows to disrupt proceedings. And they say, although they recognise people's right to protest, they're going to have a very low threshold in terms of what goes on Saturday and any kind of disruption. Republic, the anti-monarchy group, has said they felt that there was a rather passive-aggressive letter that had been sent to them, and they were not going to let it stop them exercising their right to protest at the coronation.
So, Parm, will there be special meetings convened to discuss what you do with protesters, and particularly what you do if they are actually protesting peacefully? And normally it would be entirely legal to do whatever they're doing, and yet we have this enormous coronation procession unfolding, I hope with great pomp and circumstance, in front of the entire world. So our rights to do whatever we're normally allowed to do hugely curtailed. And where are the protesters? Where do they normally get taken to get them out of the way so they don't ruin the TV shot, apart from anything else? Because we don't want that. Not on TalkTV, where we're doing 5 solid hours chaired by moi. I don't want anyone interrupting a damn thing. So what do we do with them?
A lot of the work in relation to protests has already been carried out, and the letters are part of that, because it's part of the intelligence gathering. Who might turn up and what might they do? And pointing out what the new laws are is part of that process. So you can still protest. No one is taking the right of protest away from any individuals, and that's part of our democracy. But what is being said is you can't disrupt things that are going on around you. You can't be noisy. You can't disrupt it for other people. You can't spoil the enjoyment. So protesters can still come and they can still protest, but they've got to do it within the law. And one of the other things I would say is that whilst police officers are managing protesters, they're not managing the counter-terrorism side of it. They're not managing the opportunist criminals who are going to try and steal your phone and your purse because the crowds are going to be so big. So there is a diversion of police activity as well. So in relation to those protests, yes, do your protests, but stay within the law and don't spoil such a huge, momentous ceremony for other people.
Is there any aspect at all of this that the police enjoy? because, you know, we're all saying, gosh, we're going to be on air for hours. You know, I've got a huge file. Sarah's got about 20 enormous files of information. I started trying to learn it, honestly, today. And I just thought, how many years since I've had to learn an enormous chunk of extremely unwieldy...
cramming for exams.
It's like cramming for finals. And I don't want to say what year I did my finals. If it was 1749, if that's what you think, that's very rude and it's completely untrue. Do not say that. 1983 is a long time ago. So, boy, am I struggling to learn this stuff. However, what we're all saying is, and we all mean it, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, incredibly exciting to be doing this. We're very lucky to be alive and to be broadcasting in the greatest city in the world. And if you heard those lyrics in Hamilton, then you did. OK, but what about the police? Is there a feeling of privilege? Is there a feeling of something very special that's being guarded?
All the police officers who will be on duty and working, I would say the majority, absolutely the majority, will be loving their time being part of the coronation. It's a huge historic event. And don't forget, police officers, they pledge their allegiance to the monarch of the country. So along with the military service and everything, there's a huge pride in being part of it. And it's part and parcel of, it's a story that you'll tell your children, your grandchildren for the future. So I actually don't know anybody who doesn't want to work it, and anybody would be volunteering to be part of the day itself.
Parm, Sandhu, thank you so much for coming in. It was a pleasure to see you.